The last thing Jane remembered clearly was Michael's tiny fingers tugging at her wrapper. He always did that when he was tired. They had been walking around the market for almost an hour, and her back was already aching. She balanced a nylon bag in one hand and held a tuber of yam under her arm. Michael was just a few weeks past his first birthday, a small, clingy child who couldn't sleep unless her arms were around him. She was buying fresh tomatoes when she set him down beside her legs. Just for a moment, she looked away to count her change. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. When she turned around, he wasn't there. She thought he'd crawled into one of the stalls. Then she started calling his name. Then she started shouting it. Within minutes, panic swallowed her whole. The traders around said they didn't notice anything strange. One woman said she thought Jane had picked him up already. Another claimed she saw a young girl holding a baby walking quickly toward the back of the market, but she didn't pay attention. Nothing made sense. The Keek riders said they didn't carry any girl with a baby that afternoon. The security man at the gate said he didn't notice anyone suspicious. It was like Michael disappeared into thin air. Jane ran barefoot through every corner of the market, crying and screaming. Her head tie came loose and fell, but she didn't notice. She screamed until her voice cracked. By the time the local vigilante group arrived, she was shaking all over. Someone called her husband. Jude rushed down from work and met her sitting in front of a fish stall, shaking her head and whispering his name like a prayer. The police opened a missing persons file and asked the same useless questions. Did she see the person who took him? Was she sure she brought the child to the market? Jude answered most of the questions. Jane just stared at the officer's pen moving. That night, they didn't go home. They sat in the police station, waiting for news that didn't come. Jude tried to stay calm. Jane didn't speak a word until morning. Over the next 2 weeks, they put up flyers with Michael's photo, his birthday picture with cake on his lips. People called with fake leads. One woman even tried to scam them. Friends came to visit and left quickly. Nobody knew what to say. Jude's mother came and asked Jane one question. Did you leave him alone? That was all. She didn't accuse. She didn't shout. But the silence after that question sat on Jane's chest like a stone. Months passed. Jude went back to work, but he was never really present. He stopped listening to music. He stopped laughing. At night, Jane would wake up and find him sitting in the living room with the lights off. They still slept in the same bed, but their backs never touched. The house was quiet, even when the TV was on. Their lives started shrinking. No outings, no celebrations. They didn't even visit friends anymore. A year later, Jane got pregnant again. Nobody talked about it, not even a congratulations. When their daughter, Rose, was born, Jane tried to hold her tighter than she ever held Michael. But the fear never left. Any time she couldn't find Rose in the compound for 5 minutes, her heart would start pounding. Jude loved Rose, but the light in his eyes never came back. Michael's name was never mentioned again. One Saturday morning, Jane was walking back from her daughter's school when she saw a group of teenagers by the roadside. A boy with sharp features and deep eyes stood out. Something about the way he looked reminded her of baby Michael, his forehead, the shape of his mouth. It didn't make sense, but her body reacted before her mind could. Her legs slowed down. She stared at the boy so hard, he looked uncomfortable and turned away. She stood there for almost a minute, staring, until a car honked behind her. She snapped out of it and walked home. But she couldn't stop thinking about the boy. She didn't know his name, or which house he came from, or if she was just imagining things. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by Rosie's bed and watched her sleep, wondering if she had just seen a ghost of the past walking in front of her. That night, Jane had a dream. She was back in the market, holding Michael's hand, but the stalls were empty and the sun was too bright. She turned to buy pepper, just like that day, and when she looked back, he was gone again. But this time, instead of crying, she saw him standing with someone, a young woman, holding his hand tightly, leading him away. Jane ran, shouting his name, but her legs wouldn't move. She woke up gasping for breath. For the first time in years, she didn't go to work. She called in sick and stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. Jude didn't ask questions when she told him. He just nodded and walked out. Jane waited for Rose to leave for school, then stood at the window for hours, thinking about the boy she saw on the road. Her stomach felt heavy, like something was pressing down from the inside. 3 days later, she saw him again. He was walking with a woman along the opposite street near the market junction. This time she crossed the road and followed them from a distance. The woman looked older, probably in her mid-40s, but she held the boy's hand like he was much younger. They entered a small provision shop, and Jane stood outside pretending to browse phone cases. The boy turned and looked at her through the glass, and something passed between them. A flicker, maybe curiosity, maybe discomfort. She didn't wait. Her heart was thumping too hard. She rushed home and locked her door behind her. That night, she told Jude, "I saw a boy. He looks like Michael. He has the same eyes." Jude didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Don't do this to yourself, Jane." And that was it. A week later, a knock came at their door just before sunset. It was a woman from the provision shop. She was standing outside with the boy beside her. Jane froze. Jude was in the bedroom, and Rose was in the living room doing her homework. "Good evening," the woman said with a smile. "I believe you've been looking at my son." Jane's mouth went dry. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn. She said they had just moved to the neighborhood 6 months ago. The boy's name was David. He was 14. "You've been looking at him a lot," Evelyn said calmly. "He noticed. I noticed. So I thought it better to come straight and ask if there's something wrong." The calmness in her voice only made Jane's chest tighter. Jude came out halfway through the awkward conversation. Evelyn introduced herself again and said she just wanted to clear the air. "He's my only child," she said. "I adopted him when he was a baby. But sometimes people stare like they know something." That word, adopted, sat heavy in the air. Jude narrowed his eyes. Jane didn't know what to say. She felt dizzy. After they left, Jude turned to her. "Don't start," he said, but his voice had changed. There was something different in his tone. Jane sat down, holding her chest. "Did you hear what she said? She adopted him. He's 14. That's around the same time." Jude raised his hand. "We don't know anything yet." But Jane could tell he was shaken too. That night, Jane didn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying Evelyn's face. Calm, polite, too polite. She didn't look like someone with a clean heart. Something about the boy's eyes still lingered in Jane's spirit. The next morning, after Rose left for school, Jane went to the provision shop. Evelyn wasn't there. A young girl was attending to customers. Jane bought a pack of biscuits and asked casually, "Is Madam around?" The girl shook her head. "She traveled this morning. She said she'll be back next week." Jane blinked. "Traveled?" The girl nodded. "Yes, with her son." That was when something snapped inside Jane. Why would she suddenly leave after visiting their house? Why now? She rushed home and told Jude. He tried to act calm, but he started pacing the room. And that was when he said something that shook her. "I know that woman." Jane stared at him. "You know her? From where?" Jude sat down slowly like his legs had given up. He rubbed his face for a long time before speaking. "Before I met you, before we got married, Evelyn used to work with my elder sister. She was a housekeeper, but she got pregnant and left suddenly. My sister said she got into some kind of trouble." Jane's chest started rising and falling. "You're saying she had a child before?" Jude nodded. "Yes, but I never thought about it until now. I didn't even know she was back in town. I swear I haven't seen her since that time." Jane got up and began pacing. "So this woman said she adopted him, but you're saying she gave birth around the same time our son disappeared?" The silence between them was louder than any answer. Later that night, while Jude was asleep, Jane couldn't stop thinking. Something told her to go back to the shop. Maybe Evelyn left something behind. The shop was locked, of course, but the window at the back was open. Jane didn't enter. She just stood on tiptoe and looked inside. It was dark, but she saw a shelf and a small table. On that table was a photo frame. She couldn't make out the full picture, but the part she saw made her freeze. It was a baby, bald head, chubby cheeks, familiar dimples. Her heart dropped. The window had bars, but her eyes wouldn't leave that photo. The baby looked just like Michael at 10 months. She backed away slowly, her hands shaking. The photo frame was dusty like it had been sitting there for years, hidden in plain sight. 2 days later, Jane was walking home from the market when she saw an old man sweeping in front of the compound behind Evelyn's shop. She greeted him politely, and he responded. Then she asked, "Do you know the woman that owns the shop in front?" The man smiled. "Ah, Evelyn? Yes, yes, my former tenant. She and that boy, David. Nice boy." Jane tried to act casual. She said she adopted him. "Is that true?" The man frowned. "Adopted? That boy? I don't know about adoption. All I know is she brought him back from wherever she went. Said he was her son. Small boy, maybe 1 year old. Let me think. That was around the same time I buried my wife. Maybe 13, 14 years ago." Jane's throat dried up. "Do you remember exactly what year?" The man nodded slowly. 2009. That was the year Michael disappeared. When Jane got home, she was almost breathless. She told Jude everything. The photo, the old man, the date. Jude sat quietly, his face pale. After a while, he stood up and left the house. He didn't say where he was going. Jane waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. When he came back, he looked even worse. He dropped his phone on the table and sat down. "I called my sister," he said quietly. "She told me something I didn't know before. She said Evelyn never came back to work after she left. But a year later, she showed up to collect money she claimed was owed to her. She came with a baby. A boy. My sister said the child was quiet and didn't look like her. She thought maybe the father was white. But now, I think that baby was Michael." Jane couldn't breathe. "You're saying she took our son? That she's been raising him as her own all these years?" Jude didn't answer. He just stared at the floor. The house was too quiet. The fan above them made a low clicking sound. Rose came in from school, and they had to pretend nothing was wrong. But inside, everything was falling apart again. That night, Jane couldn't sleep. She went through old photos, staring at every tiny detail in Michael's baby pictures. She kept thinking about that boy's face, David, his eyes, his mouth, his dimples. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You need to stop looking for what's not lost. Don't destroy what's left of your family." Jane stared at the message for almost a full minute. Her heart was pounding. She checked the number. It wasn't saved. She called it immediately, but the line was switched off. She tried again. Same thing. She didn't tell Jude at first. She just sat there in the dark, thinking about every word in that text. Don't destroy what's left of your family. What did that even mean? By morning, she couldn't hold it in. She showed Jude the message. He read it, frowned, and put the phone down. "Maybe it's just someone trying to scare you," he said. But he didn't sound convinced. They both knew this wasn't random. Evelyn had left town the same day they visited. Now someone was warning them to stop digging. Jane couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything pointed to the one thing she had prayed for since the day she lost her son. The next evening, Jane's phone rang again. This time it was a real number. "Evelyn." Jane answered with shaky hands. Evelyn's voice was calm, too calm. "I heard you've been going around asking questions. I thought we already spoke." Jane didn't waste time. "That boy is not your son." Silence. Then Evelyn said something Jane didn't expect. "You think I stole him?" "I didn't. I was given that child." Jane sat up straight. "Given? By who?" Evelyn laughed. "Ask your husband." Before Jane could say anything else, the line went dead. She called back. No answer. She called again. Switched off. Jane turned to Jude. What did she mean by that? Jude blinked. "I don't know." His voice cracked. "I swear I don't know." But there was something in his eyes that said otherwise. Jane couldn't rest. Her head was spinning. She didn't trust Evelyn. But now, she wasn't sure she fully trusted Jude either. That night, while he was in the shower, she opened his old suitcase in the wardrobe, the one he hadn't touched in years. Inside, she found an envelope with cash in a folded paper. It was a receipt from a private clinic, dated 2 weeks after Michael went missing. The name written under payment made by was Jude. When he came out, she didn't shout. She just handed it to him. Jude sat down slowly, like the truth had been waiting for him all along. "I didn't plan it," he said quietly. "I didn't know she would take him. I swear, Jane." She didn't understand. "What are you saying?" Jude closed his eyes. "I owed Evelyn money. A lot. She said she could help me. She knew someone who could make the debt disappear. I didn't ask questions. I just agreed. But the day Michael disappeared, she stopped calling. Then she left town." Jude explained everything in pieces. Years ago, he got into financial trouble and borrowed from dangerous people. Evelyn offered to help. She said she had connections. She said the help came with a favor, but she didn't say what kind. He never thought it had anything to do with Jane or their baby. Until that day in the market, when he got to the station and saw the look on Evelyn's face, calm, not surprised. That's when he knew. But he kept quiet. He thought saying it out loud would break Jane. So he buried it. "I thought if we had another child, maybe we could move on," he said. Jane stared at him like she was looking at a stranger. "So you've been sleeping beside me for 10 years knowing that woman could be raising our son." Jude covered his face with his hands. "I didn't know for sure." Jane didn't sleep that night. She lay on the floor of the living room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was losing her mind. Everything in her body said the boy was Michael. Every mother's instinct in her heart screamed it. She stood up at 4 a.m. and packed a small bag. When Jude asked her where she was going, she didn't answer. She took the first bus out of town. Evelyn had said she was traveling, but she hadn't said where. Jane was ready to find out. She didn't have a plan, only fire in her chest. She would find that boy. And this time, she wasn't taking her eyes off him, not even for 5 seconds. It took 2 days of asking questions and following whispers before Jane found the house. It was a small bungalow in a quiet part of town. A girl selling fruit by the roadside confirmed it. Yes, one woman and her son. They'd been around for some days. Jane's heart started racing. Her legs felt weak, but she kept moving. She stood in front of the house for a long time before knocking. Evelyn opened the door like she had been expecting her. No shock, no fear, just a cold, tired look. "You came," she said. Jane's voice was calm, but her hands were clenched. "Where is he?" Evelyn stepped aside. David, Michael, was sitting at the dining table eating bread and tea. He looked up and blinked. His eyes didn't show recognition, but Jane's knees almost gave way. That was her son. Evelyn didn't argue this time. She just sat down. "Is yours," she said. "I never had a child of my own. I was desperate. When the man I was working with told me to collect a child in exchange for clearing Jude's debt, I did it. I told myself I was saving him from poverty. But I knew I was stealing. I knew." Jane couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was strong. "You knew, and you still let me suffer for 10 years. Evelyn looked at the floor. "I never stopped feeling guilty. But by the time I wanted to return him, he already called me Mom. I didn't know how to undo it." Jane turned to David. "Do you remember me?" He shook his head slowly. Jane took a deep breath. "Then we'll start again. From the beginning." She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She just held out her hand. David hesitated, then placed his small, warm hand in hers. The moment their skin touched, she knew. She didn't need a test. She didn't need a confession. Blood knows blood. She walked out of the house holding her son's hand, the way she should have done all those years ago. This time, she wasn't turning around for anything.